Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If this is your first time here and you see a little button down below in YouTube, you can click on that button and you can end up in Zoom. And when you click on the button there, you'll end up in Mukana, where we're actually asking questions and chatting amongst ourselves. Now, if you see us talking about those things and answering those questions, and you think that you could help with that, you could make a difference in that area, then we recommend that you try. Come on up. We would love to have you on the panel. We have a very great panel here today, talking about pre-production in the second hour, and in the first hour answering your general questions. You can join us if you're here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time when we start doing mic checks. Once we start the mic checks, that is the panel. So join early if you're not sure if you're ready to join. If you might have to tweak your camera or tweak your mics or something like that. Come in early. We open the doors at 6 a.m. Now, the best thing to do is to get those questions in early before we even get started at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That way, and the best thing to do there is just write them down. Write them down somewhere. Oh, I don't quite understand this. It's so much easier to ask us than to Google it, because we have 500 years of production experience here, or AI thing that will kind of sometimes work. So if you can't find it, figure it out in a couple minutes on Google. The best thing to do is come up here and ask us the question, and we'll chew on it and at least give you more things to Google between shows. Now, the second hour, the first hour is anything you want to talk about around media and virtual production. The second hour is something that we think is important to talk about specifically. And in this case, we're going to talk about pre-production. What has to happen before a show so that the show actually turns out? It's really where you make the show. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation in the second hour. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about getting started with AWS. So a lot of us are going to build our accounts, talk about what it's looking like. Guy's going to show us, basically it working. So we actually get to see what the end goal will be. And then we're going to spend the next 4 weeks kind of building things up in AWS and asking questions. And so we're pretty excited about that process. So hopefully we'll see you there. Saturday, of course, we'll talk about education. There's a lot to talk about this week, I think. And so we'll be talking about education for 2 hours as the second hours. And then we have a 1 hour with Ripple training. A lot of us are learning Resolve together. So, and you'll see there is a link where you can download, you can buy their software at a really reduced rate and then join our conversation. Little special thing after that at noon on Saturday, we're going to build Raspberry Pis. So we're going to do Playout B, which is our own Jonas Tatel built. And we're going to get it all installed onto a Raspberry Pi. And so we're going to learn a little bit about Raspberry Pis and how they get built and so on and so forth. There's been a lot of questions of, can I do anything else with the Raspberry Pi? And absolutely, there's lots of things you can do with the Raspberry Pi. So we're going to kind of try to start getting over the hump with that. So definitely stay tuned for that. Now, if all of this is valuable to you and you think that other people that would enjoy this, go ahead and share it. Don't share your own link. What you want to do is share the link I just put into Mukana and spread the word. The bigger we get, the more fun we'll have. All right, Bill, let's take it away.
And our first question this morning, highest rated, comes in from Alex Delegnowitz in Toronto, Canada, who says, why not use other contribution solutions such as SRT mini servers or others instead of Zoom so that you have more full control over things?
So you can, if you're doing what we call a direct to camera, the SRT actually works pretty well. You're asking someone to say something that's going to come back to you, and delay is okay. Where we stop using SRT is where we need people to talk back and forth. So when they have to talk back and forth, the latency on SRT is higher than Zoom, considerably higher, at least 2 or 3 times as high as Zoom. And so that's the reason we tend to. And if it gets down to Zoom, then it's not any better. To get to 200 milliseconds and to pass the video has just a certain quality right now that we can get to. So that's really the reason that we don't use some of the more higher quality video feeds, is because with that higher quality comes latency, and then the conversation feels very disjointed. But for direct to camera, where someone is actually going to just say things, you need them to say it. There are lots of better tools to do that. The one advantage of Zoom is that everybody knows how to use it. So sometimes we also use it just because that you can say, okay, we're going to bring you in over Zoom, and there's not a lot of question about it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I would argue that office hours was in large part a moment in the Zoomification of America. Very few people, I had used it a few times in the education space, but I did not spend much time on it before office hours when the pandemic locked us all down and we suddenly needed this way to have a communal experience.
Yep.
Zoom was right there and just blew up. And so not being conversant with how Zoom operates, and I think one of the things Alex has done brilliantly here is really let us dig down deep into all the functions of Zoom so that we master more than just the basics of
Yep.
logging in. That was important, I think, because that culture and society changed.
Next question.
TJ Asher of Minneapolis, Minnesota said, Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, 4K users, what's your recommended shutter angle or shutter speed for use with live video like we do here?
Go ahead, Nick.
It's going to really depend on the look that you're aiming for. If you're looking for like a broadcast news type of look, then you're going to want a short or shallow angle. So like 25%, or was it 90 degrees, something like that. And if you want a more cinematic look, it would be 180 degrees.
I mean, most cameras run it at 180 degrees. At this point, that's their standard, or basically it's the shutter speed is twice the frame rate. That's the 180 is. So if you have a 30 frame per second, your shutter is at 1/60th, et cetera. The Chris is.
I think it's six. Don't you mean 60th? What? Not one. Oh, one.
If your frame rate is 130, is 30 frames a second. It's 1/60th of a.
1/60.
So it's twice that is kind of the standard. In World War II, it was 90 degrees, which was, so it's it made it more stuttery. If you watch Saving Private Ryan, they actually shot it at 90 degrees, so that it would give it that kind of World War II stuttery motion, and that was a limitation of the cameras. A lot of times what we do is we actually do it at 360 to get more light if someone's just sitting there talking, because you won't see it. And the other we got into that habit because a lot of what we were shooting was 1080i or 720p 60, and we were only streaming 30. And what we found is everybody looked stuttery. And if we opened it at 360, it would, when we cut through away half the frames, we would end up back at something that would look normal. And we don't find that the added motion blur, we only do it if we're in low light situations. It's better to have, generally we do it at 180, but we will change 360 oftentimes before we gain up. Sky, and then Bill, and then Chris.
This is that camera at the 4K. This is 60 frames a second at 30 FPS, or sorry, 60.
Which is normal.
That
kind of
1/60
film.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
So remember that there are three things really in all cameras that kind of indicate the picture brightness, or it's shutter speed, it is ISO, and it is aperture. So aperture is how much light you let in. Shutter speed is how long you let that light hit the sensor. And then ISO is an artificial boost. So those three things always interact. And if you get them out of whack, you can create noise. If you do too much ISO, you can not be able to get enough light if your shutter speed is too fast, or if your aperture is too small, and that happens a lot. You want a small aperture when you're outdoors and the light is bright. You want a big, large aperture when you're in a theater doing a play and you need to gather more light, but those are going to affect the other two, and you have that ratio.
Go ahead, Chris.
In an effort to educate, I think one of the things that's been going through my head a lot is we as a community could create a series of comparison videos. So we're talking about shutter rates and things, and you could do this with the Blackmagic cameras, but you can also change the exposure time on webcam settings and things like that. But we should do like a series of, this is what it would look like if you do this or this. And then in the same vein, audio, show people, this is what it sounds like on this mic. This is what it sounds like on this mic. Same person, bunch of mics. And so you can hear the difference.
I have
also camera position. This is what it looks like when you see the ceiling behind me. This is what it looks like when I have proper headroom.
I have this stretch goal at some point of building basically something that's like a mini anechoic chamber, not really an anechoic chamber, but like something that's pretty isolated, and have myself, my wife, and my kids, because we all have very different registers, and then get like 60 mics and have us all say the same thing into those mics as a reference point. And then you can just see what these different registers sound like across the different mics as kind of a big thing, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Chris, as an editor, what you just need to do is go back through all the office hours and get all of Paul Wallace's mic checks over the last 360 days.
we just glue them all
I
together.
think that's every mic known to man.
The other thing to think about is also with shutter speed is one of the challenges we get into with shutter speed is when you are, like, for instance, shooting in Europe, you have a hertz of, that what the lights are going at, and if your shutter speed is faster than the hertz that's going on, so it's 50, it's et cetera. So if you have 1/60 of a second, you'll see flickering, and so what you have to do is oftentimes lower that shutter speed down so that it's below the recycle rate or the cycle rate, and then you'll actually get rid of that flickering. Next question.
Andy Dolph of Durham, New Hampshire says, professional grade, in quotes, wireless data service. Is that a thing? If so, how do you get it and what does it cost?
Yeah, I mean, professional grade wireless data is usually point-to-point microwave. So that's what when we think of professional grade, and then you have bonded cellular, and there's a company called I'll have to think about it in a second, but there are companies that actually produce it as a event service where they'll come in and actually build cellular for a location. But the most popular is wireless because it has the lowest. One wireless connection will have a very low latency and low jitter, as opposed to bonding a bunch of cellular connections together that oftentimes will have a higher jitter and a higher latency. So cellular is not something that most people do that way. If you're going to do video transmission, then the popular way to do that is a live view. And that's probably the most popular way to do that. Next question.
Andy Dolphin, Durham, New Hampshire, is in with this one. Puzzle continues. Blackmagic TV Studio into a web presenter, loop through to a Hyperdeck Mini. Record from the web presenter in QuickTime. The audio was delayed about 100 milliseconds more than on the Hyperdeck. Any idea as to how or why or how to fix?
What I think is odd is that the audio is delayed. So the one thing I will say is that the web presenter historically had a problem where the audio would come in ahead of the video. So the video would take longer for it to manage, and it was out of sync a lot. So, but we didn't see it when it was embedded into the video, embedded into the SDI. It was when, and I'm assuming that all your audio is embedded. If the audio is coming in separately into the web presenter, I guess that's the part I'm not clear of. I'm assuming that it's being embedded, and if it's embedded, it shouldn't get offset. We would have to take that into the lab because I don't understand if my question is really, and it should be the video is behind the audio. If it went through a bunch of things and you plugged it into the XLR in the web presenter, I also don't know if it's. And even ask the question again with some more, maybe filling some of these details in. Go ahead, Chris.
You could also replace the phrase "it is out of sync" with "it is ahead or behind," because a lot of times people can't really see which way. I can't. Well,
it says the audio is delayed by about 100 milliseconds more than on the Hyperdeck. So and audio being behind video is super weird. Like video behind audio is almost every production. So when you say audio is behind the video, that's like a very, very odd thing to go wrong. Go ahead, Chris.
Andy just wrote in that it's audio embedded in the SDI. I don't know if that changes.
No, that's completely illogical.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, it may be happening to him, but I don't know what. Seems like a very odd thing. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One question I have is if you take the Hyperdeck out of the loop, does that correct the problem or not?
Yep, that's a good point. I'd definitely take a look at that. But I've literally never seen that, and I have lots of all of these things. Go ahead, Nick.
There's also the make sure you update the firmware on both the Hyperdeck as well as the web presenter. There's always update.
Yeah, I do know that some of the delay issues got fixed with the Hyperdeck in some of the newer updates, but I'm assuming you already have a newer one or a well-updated one. Go ahead, Courtney.
Also, he's going through 2 stages of encode and decode in H.264 there because he's encoding going into the web presenter and then
Yeah,
decoding.
but the web presenter should be looping through, so it shouldn't have any. It shouldn't be going through any processing. When you go through the web presenter as a loop, it's
Well, let
not
me
really
finish.
doing anything to it. That's
Well,
why
what I'm
it's so
saying is
odd.
he's taking the output of the web presenter into a computer and then recording it in QuickTime. So it's his recording is done out of the web presenter through the computer and then re-encoded in QuickTime. So there's a double decode and encode in there.
Yeah.
If the
It sounded
recording,
like
he's
the
saying,
recording was actually in the
if the recording,
Hyperdeck.
he's
I
saying
mean,
is out of
it could be
sync.
the software recording it. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
You're right that it could be
QuickTime.
like QuickTime or whatever. That could be what's. It could be a software thing in the computer. That's a very valid point, Courtney. I don't know. Next question.
Jan Landy here in the panel from Las Vegas says, what causes video noise when using a green screen on Zoom? And what's the ultimate way to light, including the placement of the lights, the subject so that their hair does not appear to be wind blown?
What do you mean by windblown? You just mean soft?
Well, what happens is a lot of times is you look at the hair and the hair is like moving around like crazy. And so, some people who are bald don't have that problem. But when I take off my hat, you could see like my hair is moving. And I don't like that. And I'm lighting it from above. I'm lighting from front. And
are
I
you
want to try to
keen?
get rid of that.
Are you keen with a ATEM or with Zoom?
I am using I'm using Wirecast.
Okay. Yeah. So you're. I mean, there's a couple things. One is that can you show us the green? Are you on? Can you show us the green screen now?
Yeah, of course I could show you. I can take the. When you say, can I show you the?
Just
green
turn off
screen?
the key.
Okay, turn off the key. Sure. There it is.
So there's a couple
You can
things.
see the noise in the back of his
Yeah,
head.
I can see the noise.
Yeah.
And the edge. So you've got a couple problems. One is there's a white edge around you. That's from the sharpening. That's something that just happens in the process. So you end up having to turn sharpening down a little bit. Another thing that really will help is that your background should always be softer than your foreground. One of the issues that you have is that once you get into Wirecast, the challenge that you're going to have is that you're already. What kind of camera are you using?
I'm using a Sony MZ1, ZV1.
But that's like an HDMI output out of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So the problem is that once it's been, and how are you digitizing it into Wirecast?
I am using an Elgato 4K interface.
So what happens is that it starts out as 422 uncompressed coming out of the camera, and then it becomes a H.264, a compressed footage as it goes in. It's thrown away about 90% of the color information by the time Wirecast gets to work with it. So it's dealing with the grain, which I can see here. There is probably some grain in the camera. It's probably gained up just a little bit. And so that there's grain coming in from the gaining up in the camera. Then you throw away all the camera information, all the color information. And that's why, keying in a piece of hardware before it gets to the computer can be so important, is because, coming in and being digitized, unless it's an uncompressed digitization, you're not working with very much data. And that's why you're going to get soft edges. It's what everybody gets, but that's why a lot of us, when we're doing keys, when you saw mine key earlier, I was keying in the hardware before it got there. Now, also Wirecast, I believe, is using pretty much a standard chroma key keyer, which means it's just identifying the green and giving you a little bit of edges to it. That's not what I would call what we call a linear key, which is basically blending. It's basically averaging between the red and the blue channels and then subtracting that value from the green channel, which is tends to generate a much more detailed key. So in general, it's really hard to get a really good key from something that's digitizing it compressed into a piece of software. You're never going to get all the way there, but you can improve it if you turn your green screen back on. There's a huge variance. If you show it again, there's a pretty large variance of the green from the top to the bottom. So you'll see that there's kind of a highlight right behind your head, and then it's considerably darker down below. Getting the closer that green gets to, the closer the green gets to being one value, the less it has to do, the less it has to get rid of to key you. And so it's basically you're using up a lot of your resources by just the gradient going down the green. And so you know, you can see that highlight right above your head. And what you need to do is have that as the closer that green becomes exactly the same green. If you're looking at it through a scope, you want to see it go straight across and be nice and thin. Now you'll have a hard time doing that. It's actually why is that the Elgato green screen that's there?
That's the Elgato green screen. And what you can't see is above me, I have an overhead light coming down.
Yeah. And so the real challenge is that the Elgato green screens aren't wide enough to do what needs to be done to get a great green screen. You're getting a good green screen right now, and that's what the Elgato is good at, is getting good green screen. A great green screen means that green screen needs to be about 2 to 3 feet wider than what the Elgato is built for, and then it needs to be further back, you know. And so you do those two things, because right now you're getting basically indirect shadowing going on behind you. So it's not just that the light is centralized across the top, but you're close enough to it that you're basically creating some ambient occlusion that is causing it to be a little darker right behind you. So that all makes it much harder for the keyer to work. And so that, along with the fact that you're getting a compressed signal to start with, you're never going to get a perfectly clean key that way. The only way to the things that you would need to do is create more even lighting. Usually I use longer sources on either side that aren't lighting you, and I push. Usually the green screen for me is a minimum of 3 to 4 feet behind me, filling the screen, edge lit, looking through a scope, RGB. You know, I use an RGB parade, looking through a scope that in the Luma wants to go across at about 70, and then in RGB parade you want 40 points between the red and the blue, further back behind you, going through a ATEM Mini or something like that that's going to be able to do an actual linear key. That's then you could get a really solid key. I mean, I felt like the key that I got in previous episodes are pretty good. A lot of hair detail, no sizzling is what we kind of call it, no edge sizzling. But that was a pretty technical endeavor as far as making that actually work. But it's not incredibly hard, but it does require the right equipment to get it. As you start to tune up and say, I really want it to be great, that's the next step from where you are now. Nick, and then Jeffrey, then Stuart, and then
so
Mickey.
Of course, all the things that Alex said, number one, double check, if your camera has manual focus, to make sure the manual focus is on and that you're in focus. It seems to me like your microphone and microphone stand are actually sharper than you and your hat are. And so you wouldn't start with a sharp image of yourself. Another thing that I found is that, LED light bulbs now consume very little energy and cast off very little heat. So you could have a couple, 100-watt equivalent daylight LED bulbs and turn your lights to face the walls. It looks like you have a neutral colored wall. If you're bouncing the light, instead of having a direct light source where the light source is directly above your head and it's only going to be the size of, that light fixture frosted, if you're directing all your light to the walls and bouncing around, that you're going to literally increase the size of your light source. It'll be the wall. And that gives you that, that more even lighting is the size of the light source. Another trick, at home might be like a translucent sheet between the light source and where you want the light to land on, so that, again, the surface area of that sheet becomes the light source. Anyway, those are just some a couple.
Stuart, and then Jeffrey, and then Mickey, real quick.
Okay, just one basic to remember, and this is especially for everybody who's shooting on DSLR. Remember that the lowest ISO of your non-expanded range in your camera gives you the least amount of noise in the image, because you want the least amount of noise before you even get to start keying. The expanded range is often the 100 ISO, because a lot of DSLRs actually start at 200. So just double check that and you'll get a good starting point.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, and then Mickey.
Three things I noticed when you were switching back and forth. One, you do have your automatic focus on, and that can change, just like Nick talked about. Two is I noticed that you might have a screen close to you, which changed light a little bit. Then of course that can change the overall key. And then third of all, I think you use digital zoom instead of optical zoom. And if you're digitally zooming into the green screen, that can cause more problem. If you optically zoom into the green screen, you'll have a better key option.
Great tip. Next question.
Eddie Scott of Mission Viejo, California says, anybody got tips for reviving a keyboard with a dead spacebar and command key?
Stuart?
If it's a laptop keyboard, throw it away because they're pretty much bonded together. But otherwise, a Phillips head screwdriver from a jeweler's kit, and you can slowly disassemble most keyboards and spudgers to get the clips open, and use like a cleaning alcohol on the surface, because it is a circuit board with rubber pads, and the rubber pads actually conduct the electricity across the circuit itself. So as long as they're clean, you'll get it to work again for a little while, which is really good for the keyboards that are heavy enough to use as cricket bats and have amazing feel for when you're writing.
It's a fun little process to do it once, to learn how the keyboard works. But when mine break down, after I did it once, when mine break down, I go to Amazon and get another one. Like, it's just a time versus money thing there that starts to add up really fast. Go ahead, Leland.
That's about what I was going to say, Alex, because I've torn apart many keyboards in the past, and I have to disagree with you, Stuart. I've replaced keyboards on laptops several times. They actually pop out very easily with a screwdriver, and it's just a connect cable. Yeah, PCs. Not
replacing
Macs, of course,
replacing them is easy, but actually pulling apart the keyboard in a laptop, no. It's not designed for that.
Some are.
And when I'm saying about
some you have to dig into, but either way,
old ones.
Replace it. Yeah, just buy a new one. The cost to replace is so inexpensive nowadays. And they even have laser keys now, where instead of using mechanical keystrokes, you have a break and a laser light that goes in between the keys, and that should last quite a while. So take a look at that.
Next question.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia. Is it possible to join two different Zoom meetings from a single computer at the same time?
I don't know if you can do it. I mean, you probably can build another instance of Zoom. You could copy the app and open it twice. So you just have to go in. I just don't know whether it would still let you, if it would still share the same preference resources. Generally, it knows you can jump. You can't even have one account join two different Zooms. You have to, in general, you can have an overall account, but you can't have your personal account, I believe, join two separate events at the same time. So yeah, go ahead, JJ.
My evil plan is to use one Zoom to feed another, and then use that for the OnZoom product to then feed that, using Zoom as a production platform. That idea, how to manipulate what we have. And I'm kind of thinking that the possibility of using a browser, like the browser-based version of Zoom, capture that from one computer, feed that into OBS while using another device to control, combined with Zoom OSC. So,
it'll be way easier to get like a B-Link that Courtney's done than to try to do it on one computer. One computer will cause all kinds of problems, like in resources and everything else. Unless you have a really beefy computer, it's gonna having two Zooms and OBS running at the same time. The chances of getting solid frame rates is extremely low. Bill, and then Guy, and then Mickey.
Yeah, what I do is probably just, as long as I have two different Zoom accounts, just put one on an iOS device and the other on my Mac, and do the HDMI out of the iOS device to feed the switcher, the ATEM, and then you could have two Zooms running simultaneously. It's just two different devices.
You go Guy, and then Mickey.
Yeah, I've done what Bill's talking about there with feeding in through an iOS, but there is something you can enable on your account if you do want to join multiple Zooms. I do it every once in a while, but you do have to have support to it, and it's chaos in your ears because you're hearing two meetings and you're in two meetings. So it's kind of funny to be like waving or making a hand gesture, and you're like in another meeting, and people are like,
"What are you doing?" You can use it in the same overall account though, but can you use it in the same login? Same login.
Same login.
So
yep.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
You have to request it from support though. It's not, and it's right. Not like you have to click on the link like in let's say an email, and then it'll open up because you can't hit that join button and type in the code again. You actually have to follow a link to get into the second meeting, and it'll launch.
Mickey, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, you can fire up an instance of Zoom OS and do it that way. You'll have two separate clients. And interestingly, like I've inconsistently had that experience, Guy, of this machine, this iMac here, opening up two meetings at the same time. And maybe it's because I'm logged into a one of your accounts, actually, Guy. Like when we do switchovers on Saturdays, going into a meeting for the Zoom OSC session, it's like I click the link. It's like, oh, it fires up both meetings at the same time. Interesting.
Next question.
Sky Gleason of Seattle, and on the panel here, March 20th on YouTube, at least 5 office hours people helping the Mad March Madness Cajun Cook-Off, Mad in the Kitchen live event. Would anybody be interested in editing some promotions for that?
Go ahead and put it in. Have you put it up somewhere in Discord?
I can. I wanted to ask
Yeah.
permission, and
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
just been a miracle of a week ago when Andy said, "Hey, I want to help," and then about 5 other people joined in, and all of a sudden, it's a
Things
thing.
are happening.
It's
Yeah.
a happening, and we're
It-
practicing.
it's a-
practicing. JJ's beating me into submission.
The it is a. I highly recommend that if you have more time, more time than right now, or and you're not fully. The big thing that I always do is just try to stay busy. Just keep doing stuff. And if you're not making money doing that, then do it. Help other people that are trying to get something off the ground, especially if they're not making money at it either. But try to, there's a lot of places. It's a real opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to network. It's an opportunity, and this is the real networking. It's not that silly stuff of walking around a conference and handing out your card. That's silly networking, or sending out your little resumes. That's silly networking. Actually being in the trenches with other people, that's real networking. Like that's how you meet people. That's how you get to know them. And that's how you build relationships that end up generating something down the road, and you never know when. I do think that Sky is on and Madeline are onto something. And I'm hoping that I'm rooting for them. And if I had more time, I'd be jumping right on that. Next question.
Stuart Fairweather of Melbourne, Australia, it wants to talk about, I think, staffing shoots and stuff like that. And he queries, where does inclusivity butt heads with don't be weird?
So I think that you want to be inclusive as when you're looking out at other folks. For yourself, if you want to be successful, you just want to be aerodynamic. Like that. I mean, that's what I would think about from a cultural perspective, as being culturally aerodynamic. So what that means is that I did not look the way I look now my entire life. No, I was pretty weird, weird haircuts, weird clothing, weird all kinds of other things. I was kind of known for it. When I actually decided I wanted to move forward, I stopped doing all those things. Because I decided that what I wanted to get done was more important than what I wanted to look like. And so I kind of became much more aerodynamic in the way I go. It doesn't mean that I'm not any more radical than I was before. It just means I don't wear it on my sleeve, And so I think that you just want to think about, if you're having trouble, I don't say don't be weird in a way that is, I think people can be weird. And I just think that if they want, I'm in a pure cold, if you want to get more work, don't be weird. Because whether you like it or not, or whether it's fair or not, people make decisions make very quick decisions about you and about what you can do and about whether you fit into the team. We definitely make decisions about folks, whether our clients will feel comfortable with them. The term tends to be called client facing, and whether they are or not, doesn't mean that we don't hire them. We just don't put them on the table next to the client. And that, basically caps what they'll do for us, because we're afraid that the client will be uncomfortable, and it doesn't matter why. It just matters that they will be. Stuart.
Yeah, just one quick point on hiring people and what have you. The conversation we've just had and that answer, which is, we're talking about don't be weird for ourselves versus who we hire.
Mm.
You can't have that conversation in a job interview here in Australia.
We can't have that here either. And so.
But we have to observe it.
Yeah. And I hire people with absolutely every background. Like, it just doesn't matter to me at all, and so all over the world, all different backgrounds, all different, directions. It doesn't, to me, all I care about is talent, but at some point people need to get the coaching that and it's not, you need to get the coaching that you need to be culturally aerodynamic to move forward. It doesn't mean that we as individuals should judge people that way. But when I'm coaching people that are, when people ask, how do I get more work? I usually say, go down that path, like of make yourself aerodynamic and get the work. Go ahead, Chris.
I think there's also a difference between having a style, like a clothing style or a hairstyle or something, versus that energetic thing of, hey, everyone, look how weird I am, and gobbling up the energy of a conversation, for example. Are they just speaking way more than someone else, or if there's just a way of like trying to get the spotlight on themselves versus just, and I think that just doesn't work in any situation, regardless of what the actual thing is.
Yeah, I mean, the things that we do here definitely are a good guide. No swearing, no religion, no politics are a great place to start when you're in a production. And then I can tell you that I look at the people around me and I make decisions about how I'm going to dress based on what that looks like. I just blend in. I don't have a style. I just have I don't worry about that because what I wear and how I look doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't, like in a thing, all that matters is that it's part of whatever is necessary to move the ball forward. So that's kind of my approach to it. Next question.
Jan Landy of Las Vegas is back again with, I've applied for and been accepted to host an OnZoom show. Does anyone know anything about OnZoom or have any tips or tricks, that could enhance the experience?
I don't know enough about OnZoom yet. Go ahead, Sky.
I would love to learn with you. We are rapidly approaching that. We're going to try to make that happen. So yeah, I want to stay connected with that question as well. I'm just going to say it's a platform. It's a place that people are going to come. Think of it like a venue. Think of it like a theater. You're responsible to host a show. At least that's the way I'm approaching it. If I'm not doing it right, let's break stuff.
Next question.
John M. Gerard of Berkeley, California says, I've got a Techrise USB sound adapter card with volume control. I have a retro mic of the moving coil type. Will that overheat if I get any voltage back over the mic input? That will overheat if I get any voltage back over the mic input. Can I use the Techrise with this type of mic?
I don't know what type of mic would be an eighth that had the moving coil that would then also have an 1/8 inch jack back in. So I guess what I don't follow is the entire connection chain there. It probably is better to tell us exactly what the brand is. Maybe ask that question again today or tomorrow, but tell us, I have this brand of mic with this connector at the end and how you're getting into that, because an old mic with an 1/8 inch jack seems odd. Real quick, Leland and Bill, we're going to keep moving because we're running out.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I've used that Techrise USB adapter and have had problems with 2 of them. So if you're having issues with audio on that Techrise adapter, I would find a Sabrent or something more beneficial than that device.
And I will push back a little bit on the Sabrent because it's about 60 dB lower than the Techrise, and it's been hugely problematic for us when we sent them out in kits. We sent them out in one round of kits and then never used them again because everyone was too low.
So I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
I know there are old mics, like old ribbon mics, where if you feed them phantom power, you will truly damage them. But most of the modern mics aren't like that. And I would guess that you're talking about so low voltage here that you can probably try it a little bit and it probably won't blow it up in one instance.
I don't know. I don't know I just don't know how you're getting from that mic to the Techrise. That's the question I have. Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois says, would it be the panel recommended? What would be the panel recommend for audio into USB? I don't need a recording function of the mix pre using the Rode AT1 interface for my NT1 mic, but the level adjustment is too coarse.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, you can. There are a lot of good interfaces that have better control than the Scarletts or other more affordable interfaces. You might want to look at the SSL 2 or also the Universal Audio Apollo line of interfaces.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, mics are very, very low signal. When you feed them into something, it needs to see the right levels. So when you get in a situation where a tiny change makes a huge difference, usually that's the signal coming in, and the signal, the amplifier that wants to see it are mismatched somehow. There are things like pads and boosters, and we've talked about both the cloud lifter type booster and pads that can be set in 3, 5, 15, 25 dB that can help match the microphone to the input's expectation.
So because you didn't say a price, this is my favorite USB interface. So this is the Sound Devices USB Pre 2. It is it's a tank. Like you could probably hammer something in with it and it would still work. It's all dip switches that change everything that you need, and it's USB powered. Does it's got limiters built in. It's got all the things in there. So if you don't need the recording of it's a simpler device. You can set it and send it out with a kit, and it just works. It's more expensive than the Mix Pre, so I'm not saving you money, but it is rock solid. So it's definitely something I'd recommend. We're going to keep moving because we're running out of time and with the number of questions we have. Next question.
Keenan Campbell, Princeton, Illinois. Can Nick Justishin talk about his setup and how he is keying the screen semi-translucently?
How are you doing that, Nick? It's magic.
So it's a virtual environment in Unreal Engine. If I have permission to share my screen, I could show what's doing that. But basically, if this is my actual green screen and my coffee cup on my desk.
Not a great example of green screen. No, you've done all the things that I told Jan not to do. But
yes,
it works.
Yes.
Your head is more aerodynamic than Jan's. There we go. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm just going to leave it like this now. I have been shamed into never showing my green screen again.
You just need to iron it. That's all. You just need a little steamer. That's all you need. All right.
A little bit of steamer. Yeah.
I'll send you one.
This is a free software tool called Unreal Engine. It works best on PCs with a really good graphics board, but I mean, any home like gaming computer or laptop or desktop works very well. And I have a Blackmagic capture card in my computer, and so that's getting an SDI feed from a real world camera, and that video then comes into Unreal Engine. It's doing the key, and I have a virtual camera feeds, NDI networking are also coming in here. So this is actually the screen capture of the screen that I'm using right now and I'm looking at, and this just lets it show up in the world. So it's a 3D graphics package. And then the nice thing is that these virtual cameras, these actually have physical SDI output on the Blackmagic board. So I can switch between which of my virtual cameras is feeding the SDI output. So if I click here, now the zoom should be getting that wide angle. I can click here, get a different angle. If I want to, I could grab one of these cameras and move it about. So all of this is happening in software. So it's just a regular camera. The output of this Blackmagic, I guess it's a Decklink board, is actually going into an ATEM Mini, which is a USB source for Zoom. So yeah, that's the long and short of it.
And Nick is going to be walking a lot of us through this process specifically in April. So when Resolve training ends, Nick's training begins. So all of you will learn how to do this if you want to. Next question.
Ask lots of questions.
Yes.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis says, what are the best practices for communicating for multiple time zones? With the future of more and more worldwide virtual events, anyone see a new time standard developing all on the same clock?
This has been done for a long time. It's called Zulu or GM or UTC. So a lot of us call it Zulu. When we're doing a lot of international stuff, you'll see us saying the meeting is at 1800 Z, and that's what that stands for. So if you see Z at the end of a thing, it just says, I'm not going to try to figure out your time zone. I'm just going to give it. And Zulu is UTC or Greenwich Mean Time is the old name for it. No, GMT. So anyway, so that's the way that a lot of people, most large organizations, including government organizations that have to integrate time, tend to integrate around that time as a pivot point. Bill and Jeffrey, real quick, because we're running out of time.
So you will get wherever you are, just learn I'm UTC +8 or I'm UTC +7. And once you know that, you can figure it out in a second.
There's a webpage, time.is, super useful. Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with.
Oh,
There
sorry.
are actually a couple different web pages that that will do the calculation. Send email with the calculations as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
And also for those of us in the United States where our time zones shift on a periodic basis, like this weekend coming up.
Not that I'm bitter.
No, but the UTC will change, right? So I could be -5 at some
Okay.
points and
So
-4.
annoying. Yeah. Next question.
Jonas Nattel, our friend from Reutlingen, Germany, says, Alex, you mentioned it's not possible or a good idea to use H.264 MPEG-4 growing files for instant replay. Would you explain why?
For instant replay, the hard part is the long GOP. It has to go back to that keyframe to find what the rest of the frames look like. So, you just have less to grab onto. So that I think that would be a difficult thing to do in a long GOP situation. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, especially if you're going to go rewind backwards, if you're going to roll, if you're going to rock and roll forward and backward, every time you go back a frame, it has to get pixels from all the frames prior to that. So if you have like a group of pictures, group of frames of 300, if you're reading frame 299, it needs to actually read all 298 frames before that to actually generate frame 299. So that's the biggest one.
Yep, absolutely. It needs to be intra-frame rather than interframe compression is the issue. Next question.
JJ McKenna, our friend here in the panel from Santa Venetia, says, what would the progression of coursework be to learn how to create your fabulous presentation space? And I'm wondering if he's talking about Nick's that we just saw.
The coursework would be to come in April. It's all free tools. It's going to be Unreal Engine, free tools. Nick and I are already scheming, and so April will be the time to play with that. But download Unreal Engine, get it working, get comfortable with it. But it's going to be. Nick started this a little while ago, but it wasn't. We had not figured out how to organize it a little bit more. Now we're getting better at it. So Nick and I are going to work on it together, and Nick's going to walk us through it starting in April for just 1 month. So you'll have to be ready to jump on it. Next question.
Comes from Ray Barchiner, had been here in the panel before, looking to code a color conversion automation using Openimageio and opencolorio. Does anyone on the panel have any idea of what I can use to build the automation in? Looking at a macros automator, I'm not a coder, but this automation needs to get done.
I think I would need to understand what the color conversion is. You know what you're actually doing. I mean, you're doing a color conversion, but what is it a live feed? Are they files? And what are you trying to go from to? I think is the thing that I would need to know before I knew how to answer that. Anyone else? Next question.
Okay, Daniel Goldstein of Washington, D.C. The beautiful streaming telemetry of the new Blackmagic Web Presenter HD made me realize I never want to stream again without seeing all that data live. Is there any RTMP encoder in the same price range which gives telemetry like that? No, it's great telemetry. I don't know of any. I mean, I think you can get some of that data from Teradek inside of their core, offering, but I don't know of any other way to do it. I've actually sent screen captures from that data to other companies saying, "See this? This is what I've been asking for the last 5 years." So anyway, not that I'm bitter, So anyway. So it's really, really well done. I mean, I might add more to it, but it's overall, I would say it's fantastic. Next question. Nick Goodfriend, and thanks for the pronunciation guide, in Bedford, New York, says, I'm looking to create a 4x10 multi-touch display. That's 4x10 foot, 4 foot by 10 foot for reception area, interactive presentation. I'm looking for hardware recommendations, panels, servers, and so forth, anything to share.
It's really a Phil question. Phil Langer, this is that's his world.
Phil's the king of displays like that.
Yeah, like I don't know if I'm the right person I don't know if we have the panel for that. I'm trying to think of who else might. I mean, I think that this is where you can start getting to things like Universe. Ventus does a fair bit of this type of thing. Those are the two pieces of software that I've seen most used for touchscreens at this point. I mean, high level touchscreens, but I don't know for sure. Go ahead, John.
So Microsoft makes the ones that you see on voting night, but they're not 4x10. I think the biggest one is 80 inches, and it's like 40 grand for that unit. It's multi-touch though.
Yeah, multi-touch is the part that gets a little complicated. Planar makes a bunch of different ones that are multi-touch. Single touch of just tapping on something tends to be something that is a little more straightforward. But yeah, multi-touch is more complicated. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there's a company called Tyco that does large screen touch screen overlays, which is it uses sensors around the edge, and they come in a variety of sizes. I don't know if they come in 4 foot by 10 foot, but you might check them out. I think it's TYCO. Large touchscreen overlays, and you might look into that and it comes out as I think HID compatible, so it should go into any computer to use as your touch interface.
Next question.
Robert Broussard of Houston, Texas says, why does Alex's camera look so amazing? Other panelists have the same Blackmagic Design 6K camera, but most others look soft.
I guess one of the things that I'm doing is part of it is like I change my focus all the time. So if you watch me, you'll see me constantly. If I move a little bit, I actually will I'll go into my ATEM and tap it again and refocus just to make sure that I'm right on. I also look a little sharper because I've crushed my blacks and pushed out my whites a little bit. So I'm really gaining. I'm trying to take full advantage. It's probably a little make too much full advantage if you look at my forehead, but trying to take full advantage of the of my range. So I'm trying to push my high levels all the way near to 195, and I'm crushing my blacks just a little bit. It actually makes it feel sharper when you have the right bit there. Now the other part of it is that we're in a real-time environment, and by having a soft, cool background, the background behind me without having a lot of detail will allow it. Basically, the compression will throw that away. And then the foreground allows the foreground to be a bit sharper because there's actually more bits available for my face than there is for the background. And so it's one of the arguments of not having. I like putting stuff back there, but having stuff back there will make it harder actually for Zoom to compress it. So there's a couple different pieces of that puzzle. Go ahead, Chris.
Just curious, how did you come up with that hue for your background?
I just dialed it in. I was like, oh, I like it. There's not any. I have a mixed panel back there, and I dialed it, and I was like, oh, this looks nice. And so I tend to lean towards cool colors or like bluish greens and greens in general because I feel like they're complementary to skin color, and so it tends to have your color pop out a little bit better. But I don't have any good reason for it. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, and is that a prime lens as well that you're using?
Nope, it's a Canon 24-70. I usually use the 24-70 lens because it gives me just a little bit of adjustment. I'm almost always at 35, like 35 degrees on the on the Canon on the 6K, but that's but I still want a little bit. Being able to just nudge in, nudge out makes a big difference. Go ahead, Nick, real quick, and then we're gonna move on. We're running out of time.
Also, it looks like you're using like a really subtle hair light. Like it's not showing up as edges on your shoulders, but it's picking up.
There's one right here. So there's one right above my head. Yeah, there is. I mean,
that helps make the hair look really.
Yeah. So there is a hair light right above me. I've got 3 Nanlite 100s in front of me, and then one right above my head. They're just extra ones we had laying around, so I put them up. Anyway, next question.
Andy Dolph, Durham, New Hampshire says, Alex, what are you using to support and position your PR40?
See if I can get this to actually. For some reason, I'm having my iPhone rig is not working as well. I'm using I'll think of it in a second. I'm using an OC White Ultima 2, and I showed it on MacBreak a couple days ago, and for some reason I'll pull up the camera. Hold on, just let me. I don't know how. This has been something I've been playing with, so it's not really good for it. But let's see. Go to 3. Anyway, this is my mic. This is all of you. This is the arm. So this is the Ultima 3. It's the old switcher that feels very lonely now. So this is the one that I'm actually using there. So that's the system right now. I haven't really figured out how I'm going to use this other 6K with that, but I was using my camera phone, but these stupid cables that I bought that I recommended a long time ago are not working. Anyway, so I had to go back to adapters, and now I don't have an HDMI cable. It was working perfectly when they started, and now they never work. I don't know. Anyway, so I had avoided doing that for a long time to buy this arm because it's $330 or something like that. And so I was like, I am not spending $300 on an arm. And but because I have screens up above, I couldn't get an arm that was overhanging that I liked. And so I kept on buying cheaper ones, and to Chris's point, buy once, cry once. And I finally just was like, okay, I'm gonna try it, and I used it, and it's the best arm I've ever had. Like, it's just so good, it's so nice, and it's so nice. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
I was wondering, could you show that angle again, because it looks like the lower portion of the arm sweeps right, like basically swipes everything off your desk if you were to swing it around.
It would. Yeah, it's right up against the thing.
Do you find that to be a problem, or do you love it?
It doesn't matter. I don't move it. Like, I don't move it from there
because you spent so much money on it.
No. It just that it works. It's just solid, and I can put it where I want it to go, and it sits underneath it, and it's as low profile as I can find it. So anyway, next question.
Moving on to Tobias Moss of Minneapolis, who says DIY or purchase suggestions for using color filters on Elgato Key Lights.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, in the days of LEDs, you don't have to worry about heat melting the gel. So just get my favorite company. I put the link in, Roscoe.
There you go. Roscoe film gels are the way to go. Absolutely. Next question.
Yeah, Roscoe and Lee are the two big players in that. Nick, good friend of Bedford, says, I have an MEE M6 in-ear monitors, and frankly, they fit reasonably and sound terrible. Harsh, muddy, useless low end. Is this a function of all less than $100 US similar products? Sure, Sennheiser. Do I have to get the $300 to $500 range to get more even frequency response?
Go ahead, Mickey, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, like, I'm not familiar with the brand Me, and I don't know what their pedigree is in the sound realm. I would tend to trust more brands that have been in the industry for much longer and are known for what they do. Brands like Sennheiser, Shure, or Etymatics, you could get a pair of those for less than 100 US.
Next question.
John M. Gerard, Berkeley, California. The mic is the Pyle PDMICR42sl. It comes with an SLR cable to 1/4 inch jack. Then I could add a 1/4 to 1/8 inch adapter. I just thought that I could use the USB sound card for a volume control. I also bought an XLR to USB cable, which would just go straight into the Mac. Is this from earlier when we were talking about trying to adapt someone's mic?
And I'm assuming that it's an XLR cable to 1/4. It comes with an XLR cable to 1/4 inch jack. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, if the microphone is from the factory wired for XLR, I would probably expect that it might be looking for phantom power, 48-volt phantom power. So doing all those conversions would negate the ability for you to send phantom power to it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a cardioid. Interesting, retrocardioid mic, a dynamic capsule. So it doesn't. Yeah. I don't think that mic would get hurt if it was put into an 1/8 inch jack. It's not going to get any voltage. That's going to bother it. It doesn't need any, but like, for instance, if you plug an SM58 into a even give it 48 volts, it's not going to do anything to it. It's just going to ignore it. Next question.
Mike Burns of Spokane says, I know it's probably been asked before, but how do I get audio from my Rode Podcaster interface into my ATEM Mini? Adapters?
So you need to get, I don't know what the output of the podcast.
Yeah, Alex, the output is basically USB 3.0. It's like micro USB coming out of it, but then it's standard USB. And the only reason I normally have it running into my iMac, but the only reason I'm doing this is I need to be able to, with the ATEM, I need to be able to pre-roll a video package with audio.
Well, I think that, so, but if you look at the Podcaster, it has headphone jacks as well as a speaker output in the back.
Yes.
So it's not, so it doesn't, you don't have to use the USB to get to it. So it's a matter of getting to those. And
well, yeah. So technically though, it's it only has a speaker in the front. I don't think there's a line in the back of it.
Well, I'm looking at the picture. I mean, if it's is it the Rodecaster Pro podcast production studio?
Yeah,
I'm just looking at it in Sweetwater. So
it's
I'm
the
looking at
fancy
the back.
one. Yeah, it's fancy one. About
Because what I
got
see
8
is I see
yeah.
2 speakers, I see two left and right, and then I see 4 headphone jacks, which are probably mixed minuses, is my guess. So it's really just the left and right out.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that, and those look like those look like I can't tell whether those are 1/4 inch out or 1/8 inch out from what I'm looking at. 1/4 inch.
Yeah, the 1/4 inch. They're the big guys.
Yeah. So I think that would that input be too loud for the? Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, you might want to look at possibly getting like an Clean Box Pro to get the balanced connections into an unbalanced stereo mini jack. And we could then feed that into the ATEM Mini Pro. Make sure the ATEM is set to look for line level.
Yep. Next question.
And the last one of the non-pre-production ones this morning is from Andy Dalp in Durham, New Hampshire. In troubleshooting that sync issue with the web presenter, is there something better to do the test recording on the Mac than QuickTime?
Well, the other thing I would say is open that video file. Now that I think about QuickTime, open the video file in Final Cut or in something else and look at it. One of the problems that we've seen with QuickTime often, I don't trust the sync in QuickTime ever. Like if I open up QuickTime, I'll always assume that it's wrong. The sync will be a little off. The playback on the sync on QuickTime in some files is not correct. So open it in Final Cut or whatever else you're using, and make sure that it's out of sync. And when I say that, I would do some kind of either a clap test or a slate test, and actually look at it in Final Cut. Look at the waveform. And see, is it really off? Because I wouldn't trust QuickTime out of the gate to be correct when it plays it back. It's a common problem. We've actually made misadjustments based on using QuickTime as a reference. So what you want to do is take a slate, and what I would do is record it on the Hyperdeck, record it on the record QuickTime, that's fine, and take a slate and just close it in front of the mic, and then take it into Final Cut and visually look at it and say, are these in different positions than listening to it and looking at it? I think that would help you a lot. And we're going to keep moving because we're going to run out.
And if you don't have Final Cut, I think VLC will do that, and it's free.
Yeah. Anyway, so any editor will do that. All right. So now we're going to shift gears. So we're now going to talk about pre-production. The place that your show actually occurs. So a lot of times we think about the show occurring there, but the most of your show and how it goes and how well it turns out is generally related to really what happens in pre-production, how you get it ready to go, how you prep the show, how you plan the show. Now that pre-production might be sometimes 6 months or 3 months or 2 months, and sometimes it's yesterday. So you have different amounts of time that you might have to actually execute that. But it is the thing that makes all the difference. So we talked a little bit about site surveys, but there's also, like, after the site survey is part of that pre-production. You now get into like the real work of figuring out exactly what's going to happen. Now, does anyone here, I know that Maggie and Liberty have joined us again, our producers. Do you have anything any highlights that you think are the most important part of pre-production? Anything that pops off the top of your head? No, we're putting them on the spot. They weren't ready for that. I just threw the ball at them, and they were like, I didn't have that route.
The only thing I would say is, like, maybe not so much for the like AV folks here, but if there are any event planners listening, the difference with digital first events and in-person events when it comes to pre-production is I find in person, the like really intense time is like just a couple days before. Whereas with digital first events, I actually find it's like 3 weeks out. Like 3 weeks out for like a week and a half is a nightmare. And then, so for example, we have a massive project on Saturday, and like things are going on and there's lots, but this is like the most relaxed I've been before a 3,000 person event when it's like 2 days away.
Yeah. Yeah, if you let it gets super stressful if you let your online event, your digital first events get produced 2 or 3 days before the event. It's super stressful and one of the reasons you need to push that out is as you're prepping speakers and getting them ready to go, you got to figure out what their able to do. Like, what is their technical capacity? And you need time to be able to send them fixes, and send things to them to correct things. And so that's why for us, that's exactly the same thing that you're saying, is that we need to kind of stay out ahead of it. Go ahead, Liberty.
Then also I'd say is just even depending on the audience, like who that client is, because if this is their first digital first event, you're looking at, it's going to go all the way up to D-Day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jan?
I think the first thing that you have to do, and this is super basic, is when you meet with your clients, that you must get an understanding of what they're expecting and to give them an opportunity to explain to them what you're going to deliver. That would be the number one thing that I would do when I produce shows. And the other thing is that the most important thing that I could say is to put everything in writing. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So when you're presenting to your clients, you want to make it clear what's in writing, because if they say, well, where about this? And you say, well, I presented to you in writing. I showed it to you. We explained it. And so that's the number one thing, is client expectation. And the second thing is to make sure that you document everything and you set a timeline from when you're going to be from the very first thing to the very last thing, when you say, thanks, everybody, great job. But you need to have a timeline.
No, absolutely. And I think that I use a lot of pictures for my clients. I have talked about it, and I'm going to try to build some kind of one that isn't for an actual project, but I haven't gotten around to it because I'm always building so many slide decks that I need to get done. But I have a lot of slide decks, and I use Keynote for everything. So I'm constantly laying out flows. This is how this is going to go, and these are where the files are going to go, and this is how this is going to turn out, and this is how we're going to. And it's just one diagram after the other, and it's not complicated. It's like little boxes, like little. If you go back and look at my HLS one, that's what they all look like. There's this box, and there's these things, and then there's little people. I'm really good at people, like from above. It's like it's an ellipse or a kind of an oval with a circle on it, and I have all kinds of different versions of that to show you, like, this is where all the people are going to sit, and this is where the audience is going to be. I've added shoulders and or I've had legs and arms recently. I'm pretty excited about it. Anyway, so but I lay out, like, this is how everyone's going to be seated. I mean, the more you can visualize for your clients, you can put it all in writing, and Jan's absolutely right. The more you use pictures, the more clear it is for everybody what's actually going to happen. And so I use a lot of pictures. I back it up with text, but I use a lot of pictures to kind of illustrate, this is what we're going to do. We do a lot of 3D renderings of a lot of what we do. So we want to render it out of, this is what everybody's going to look like. And this is what, when they're seated, this is what our camera views are going to look like. And this is what this is going to look like when we were doing physical events. But before that, you're kind of sketching those things out. And the things you have to kind of list is think about all the assets that you're going to need. Do you need lower thirds? Do you need the graphics? Who's going to do the open? Who's going to do, there's three slides in a digital event that you need. Those 3 slides are starting soon. We'll be right back, which is usually called a text slide. And thank you for watching. And the thing you want to think, those are the first things that you absolutely know. You may not have any of the other ones. Those ones you need, so because generally you'll start your event late, not because of anything you're doing. It's because the client, the speaker will be late, they're not quite ready and everything else. And the one thing I will say is that it's better to start late well than to start on time poorly. Like, it is very, very important to remember that, when clients aren't ready and they're coming out and they had something went wrong and everything else, let them settle. Tell your client that you're going to start late and then go forward. But that comes back to pre-pro of making sure that you try to push to have everybody ready long before you got ready. But anyway, so you get those slides done. Remember that, like, starting soon is front selling everything and preparing and having an agreement with your audience. The text slide is never a logo because that becomes a meme. It is just the thing. And then the end slide is a call to action. And so anyway, you think of those, and then you have graphics, you have lower thirds, who's making the videos? Like, that gets into this thing, like, if it's not you, it's usually Chris. But if they're making the videos, if they're going to cut the videos, are the clients doing them? And then if the client says they're managing the videos, unless they do this a lot, you should worry about that and manage that with more carefulness than normal, because they may not know how deep the water is. That's a pretty common thing. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that happens to us often is we have some clients that want to just talk on the phone, and it gives them an escape, which is really scary. Well, I said that. I don't remember. And a lot of times what I'll do is after the conversation, I will, and I'm always taking notes, I'll say to them, okay, I'm going to send you an email with what I think I heard you say. Will you please respond to that? And I like that transition point from taking that sort of safe escape zone that they may want to hold, and I will, gently put their feet to the fire by converting it to text.
Well, and also just making sure that there's also just making sure that we're on the same page, because
Exactly.
it's very easy for you to hear the wrong thing. Now, I don't take any notes ever. Well, I do sometimes. I very rarely do, but I have somebody else in the meeting that does. So there's always somebody else in our company that's in a meeting with me, because and the reason I do this, and this is the reason why it's important in pre-production, anytime you can do this, this is a much better way to do a meeting with a client in pre-production, is to have one person building the event with the client and another person writing it down. It is very hard to do both well. People think that they can, but you have so many commas. What you're always trying to remove when you're having any conversation, whether it's this show or with clients or with whatever, is remove all the commas. And so how do you, because there's all this, okay, now we're going to write this down, and now you're not thinking about their show anymore. You're writing down whatever we just said. So it is incredibly powerful if you can have someone else working with you on the project, preferably another producer or whatever, writing everything down very carefully so that they're just focused on that. And a lot of times they'll be texting me in the background, like, make sure to ask this, make sure to ask that, make sure to, these are things, but they're able to be kind of separated from that and asking that. And in a pre-production cycle, it's super, super useful. Anything else before we get to the questions? Yep. Next question. First question.
Go ahead,
Maggie. We'll go, Maggie, last word.
I was just going to say, in terms of like framing a conversation about pre-production, it's kind of the 80-20 rule. Like, we're talking about 80% of the project right now. Yeah. Like, just to like, we're talking like in that like sphere of time, we talked about like contract signing all the way to like slides in the day before. So like, just keeping that in mind with questions, that's like, it's a massive amount of time.
And remember that my favorite line that I used to have in my office, I'm going to put it back up as soon as I had a little plaque that just said, from Omar Bradley, that says, amateurs talk about strategy and professionals talk about logistics, and it's very great to talk about how great the project will be and what you want to do and what you want to get out of it and how it's going to work. But you do have to, at some point, figure out when people are going to load in, when the graphics are showing up, what the resolutions are, all those other things are super important. And it's great, but a well-produced, project is what you want to do, is a good landing. And one of the most common things that we start talking to our clients about as things start to run closer to the event is, hey, we're running out of runway. just let you know that the runway's coming up pretty fast. So we need to, kind of pull our ears back. Let's go to the questions. Go ahead, Bill.
So if questions were a horse race, this is one of those weird races where one horse is so far out in front of all the rest that it's surprising. This has so many votes. People want to know. It's a Doug Ferguson question from Fort Wayne. When do you cut off changes to the show, and how do you charge for those changes?
I cut off changes to the show about a week after the show ended. So like that's usually the last word. That's like everything's delivered and the client walks away. That's pretty much when the show is over, and when we're not going to make any more changes. Now, I mean, so you want to think that it's all going to get laid
when
out.
The check clears.
Yeah, when the check clears, exactly. But I think that for at least what we do, and I admit that most of my job is very bespoke. So I'm designing stuff that, every show is different. I'm not there's nothing about it that's the same. There are things that you can change easily at the last minute, and there are things that you can't. And part of it is knowing what those are. And the thing that people get into is, and it's not just that they're complicated or not, it's, as you get closer, it's not whether you can do it or not, or, okay, we can't make any more changes. It is pointing out to the client that it will destabilize the event. You're doing a live event and go, hey, if we make this change now, there's a bunch of things we haven't tested. There's a bunch of things that we won't know. And one of the things I try to explain to clients is, if we do this, it may not be that thing that fails. What you're doing is you're taking attention time away from something else that needed to get done that may fail. So anything could fail. And you're it's kind of a bit of a CYA of if we make this change, anything that you know, and in writing, anything could go wrong if we make this change. And so you say that, and if they say okay, then you go, okay, we'll do that. But we just, you know, I very rarely tell the client no. I just often tell the client, we don't advise this right now because of, you know, X, Y, and Z. And then as far as cost goes, we usually tell them if it's a change that's going to cost us money. If it's a change that doesn't cost me money, then I don't usually. I mean, but if it's taking more time up or whatever, and that I'm paying for, we absolutely tell them up front it's going to cost. You know, this change will cost $3,500 or $2,000 or $100, whatever that is. So it is this. We don't recommend it. You know, and then they make a decision. But we've seen the biggest change I've ever seen in a live event is we had a chief marketing officer for a company walk out on stage then 2 nights before the event and say he didn't like where the stage was for 15,000 people. It was a $400,000 change. You know, like it was just like, and it happened overnight. You know, like it was fixed. But it was, you know, so you know, everybody makes those changes. It's just that you have to outline ahead of time. This is the problems that could go wrong, and this is how much it's going to cost. So go ahead, Bill, and then Maggie.
For me, it was always, it determines the relationship. Early in a relationship with a new client, it's absolutely critical to have everything specified and written down. You're getting to know each other. As relationships with clients develop, hopefully you'll be with them a long time. And I had clients who were with me 15 years after we started, and the nature of change becomes a different thing. They respect you, you respect them. If they're asking for something, you can get a feeling for whether or not that's something that really matters to them. And if it is, and the relationship is important to me, I will push a little harder to make that happen, even if I take a little bit of a financial hit. It's that bonding of how you work with somebody and getting to know them getting to know you. And at the beginning, it is important to protect yourself because everybody likes to have that control to make changes. And it can be abusive in the early days. But once you know they're good people and you're working with them and you've got that simpatico, it can relax a little bit, in my opinion.
I think that we oftentimes budget a certain amount of changes into what we're doing. You know, like we just budget into it so that we don't have to nickel and dime the client over it. That we have some kind of contingency built into, you know, we have enough people. You know, a lot of it is just that we budget enough people to do the job so that there can be some fluidness, you know, in that process and that we can adjust to it. Clients that really want big changes with no budget against them and complain about it, it doesn't mean we don't always do the job, but oftentimes we're really busy after when they call the next time, you know, like, oh, I can't make it. You know, you do have to, a lot of your business comes down to picking good clients. Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you do have a cutoff, like you're actually going to implement a full cutoff, that needs to be communicated before I sign the contract, because we're going to be in major trouble down the line if you make up a cutoff day. And if I do know that in the contract, I would caution that I likely wouldn't sign that contract, because when it comes to events, things are always changing, like constantly. Right. Like I have a pre-recorded piece for this weekend, and the magician was like, go and share on social media. And we were like, we told everyone not to do anything on social media. You have to go and recut that whole thing. And it's not our fault. It was just never, that piece was not noticed.
Well, and when we do events and people say things like we should be at this certain point or we should be at this other point, I always want to send them to the Armageddon clip where they're drilling and NASA's telling them that, you know, you should be right now, you should be at 600 feet, and Bruce Willis just looking into things. This is what happens when you drill. You know, like we are not going to make your official, like, whatever, you know, and that's just the way a lot of these come out. Go ahead, Michael, and then Jan.
Yeah, so I think it's really all about, you know, covering your butt, right? If I had $1 for every time I worked on a show where a senior producer tried to throw me under the bus, I'd be a rich man. So you put it in writing, put it in emails. This way your butt is covered. And yeah, and you also set the expectation, which is super important for the clients and everyone else. This is what I'm going to do, and here it's in writing.
And I have to admit that I just don't have, I mean, I definitely worry about those kinds of things. I don't have very many confrontation. Like, I don't think of it as kind of trying to cover my butt as much as just having great communication with folks that we're working with about where it is, and kind of, I think that very rarely do I need to ever have that. Now, I will admit there are large groups of producers I won't work with that probably are more like that than others that I won't get into regions, but they're in Southern California. Jan.
One of the things that I've always developed immediately is the confidence in who I am and what I can do for you. So most of my clients have no clue about what it is that I do. They just know
Mhm.
that I do it right. They don't know anything about shows. Like I've been in situations where we've already set everything up, and then they say, well, you know, we just want to put another piano in. But in the beginning, I didn't figure out that there were going to be I needed 4 more inputs in my console because we've already used everything up. So the most important thing to do is to develop that they are confident in your ability. And if they're confident in your ability, when they come to you with the changes, you could then explain to them why the changes are either unacceptable or what you can do to make the changes happen. But that's the most important thing. If they're confident in who you are and your ability, then when the changes come, you will be able to manage those changes.
Go ahead, Maggie.
I just want to like also name that like we should be working like in relationship with each other.
Right.
I agree entirely about writing things down and having like something to follow, but like we should be working in these ways with our clients and each other in a way that's like in a trusted, like we're building a creative and trusting relationship. So I do get a bit cautious when these conversations turn into like everything needs to be written down and, you know, like somebody's gonna throw me under the bus, all these things. Like we should be looking to work in relationship together in a way that we're looking out for each other for the best of the team, really.
Yep. And I will say that that's, I mean, what I was kind of alluding to before is that we just don't have that many conversations where I feel like I have to do that with the client. You know, so the, you know, most of the time what we're doing, because we'll change all kinds of things, you know, I look at every change, every plan, every move as, you know, how can I do that and still produce the event? Like I'm not, and if it is going to be an additional cost, how much is it? And just, I like, if I think that something's going to radically damage the event, then I will definitely bring it up. Like, I think this is a bad idea. You know, this is not going to work. It's just out of me communicating to the client that I don't know if their event will turn out. Otherwise, if I don't think that, I will say yes to everything. I'll just tell them how much it costs to do that. Like, this is how much that costs to do. And then also I tend to equip my equipment, my crew, everything else to be somewhere between 40 and 60% capacity. So there's a lot that they can ask for before I run out of runway. Go ahead, Liberty, and then we'll move on to the next question.
And then just following up with Jan, Bill, and Maggie is us asking those questions and even anticipating. That's sometimes difficult when it's someone new, but you get that they're the client and they can be frantic. So just also putting that on us, asking really good. Yeah.
A lot of times I find that things that I didn't ask, you know, or I didn't say, like, that we'll just assume that it is a certain way, and because that's the way we do it, but the client didn't know that. And so we have to be careful of that as well. Next question.
Moving on to Daniel Coldstein, Washington, D.C. Any recommendations for project management tools? I hope that there's one that's made for AV production with Gantt charts, dashboards, reports, automated reminder emails, or maybe with a Frame.io type features.
Curious what the most popular tool is among this audience. Who uses what? I can tell you what we use. I'd love to say that we didn't, but we use Keynote and Google Docs. the two biggest things that we use. Go ahead, Maggie.
I love Asana, but the problem that we have with Asana is that so when we go and work with a client, we have to work under kind of their frame a little bit. So I would have to produce all of their stuff and then put it into Asana, and it was just too much work for me. So we've actually just basically started using all of their platforms, but the best one that we do use when we're able to is Asana.
Interesting. Yeah, Doug, and then Sky, and then Jan.
Yeah,
pretty quick. We're moving quiet.
For visual mapping, I use Visio and Photoshop, but for anything else important to the show, Google Sheets, and sharing that sheet with everybody, that way the data stays live and everybody knows what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I go Jan and then Sky and then Chris real quick.
When the last time I produced a show, we didn't have computers, iPads and phones. Everything had to be in writing. I used to print everything out and give everybody the sheets so that they could have that information right in front of them. But the one thing that I want to go backwards because somebody said something, and what I'm talking
about.
Don't
go backwards. Okay. We don't have enough time. Do not go backwards.
The timeline is important. Okay. In other words, when the crew arrives at the catering, everything has to be on a timeline.
Yeah. Don't go backwards. Go ahead, Sky, and then Chris.
Google Docs, Google Sheets. We're using Slack for our internal communications because it glues to all of the different connective ancillary products, and then we're using Discord as our external contractor and people that want to support and help.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris, and then Michael.
Quickly, a nice tip is if you're using like a shared document, like a Google thing, get the client on it very early. First phone call, hey, I'm going to send you a link. Here's some notes that we took. And make that sort of the go-to information point very early on in the process. So like the day before the show, you're not saying, oh, by the way, here's a spreadsheet you should probably be looking at.
Right. Absolutely. Michael?
This is going to sound a little funny, but there's a program called Master Tour. And believe it or not, it is extremely inclusive of almost everything you're doing. You can't really do the visualization stuff that you're talking about, but everything else, easily updatable. It as soon as you update it, it updates it to everybody all the time. You can change timelines, whatever you need to do. It's a great program.
Master Tour?
Master Tour. Yep. Put out by Eventric.
Go ahead, JJ and Bill, and then we'll move on.
Since I'm working on Sky's Crew, also the project manager tool is Teamwork. Teamwork.com. They have, you can integrate all of those things except for Discord into Teamwork. So you use that as a centralizing controller for everything. You put Gantt charts as well are available. You can create reports afterwards. You can create budgets. You put in even cost per person in your resources.
Bill, real quick.
The last 2 months, all I've lived in is Discord, Zoom, Omnigraphel, and Frame.io. And I'm mostly a video producer, so I don't do that. But those 4 have been the heart of my communication back and forth with teams.
Next question.
Ramesh Linej, looks like from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Any recommendations on any cheap tools for creating AV workflow diagrams, cams, audio, and so forth, and cue rundown sheets with samples of videos included? Trying to get a school to try out media production more seriously and looking at cheap or free options, ideally to get them started.
There are some wireframing stuff that's on the web, I believe, that's relatively inexpensive as far as signal flow. I use Omnigraphel, but I don't think that in Sri Lanka, I'm not sure if you're probably PC based and looking for something that is free on the or relatively inexpensive. Vizio is another one that a lot of people do for visuals, but I don't know what's on the web. Go ahead, Leland.
I dropped the link for draw.io, which is another diagramming utility that we used for several of the events that we've done recently.
Right. And again, you can, like when we're doing stills, a lot of times with samples of the images, we'll put those right into Google Docs. Go ahead, Bill.
And I'm still using FileMaker Pro. You can embed stills and video in that and do rundown sheets.
Yep. Next question.
Courtney Gooden of Hollywood is in next with how would you get the most information you need to do your job from a client without seeming like you are pestering them?
Go ahead, Liberty, and then Maggie.
You want to look at like that first meeting or whatever, that onboarding, if you've got your checklists already, maybe even a form that they complete in advance. That way you're as prepared as possible. And depending on how long before the actual event, a weekly status meeting or some kind of check-in, also that project management tool helps as well, so that you're not using up your time and their time as well. Those are just some of the ways that we've been able to do it as well.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I agree with everything Liberty said. Sometimes we've also had contractors or companies we're working with put a list of required items and information by certain dates. And if it's in the contract, it's so easy for us to just put that in our planning process that we can go, okay, Alex needs X by this date. Great. We'll send it to him 2 days before, or we'll do our best.
And one of the things is that we, especially on an onboarding meeting, like this is the first meeting to figure this out. We usually have a meeting that's like a half an hour long before that meeting where we talk through all the things that we need to know and what we're trying to do. And we have ideas about what it would look like. But that very first meeting, a lot of times, is trying to figure out what their expectation was, figure out whether that's really the best way to do what they're doing. I will be probably the most confrontational in that first meeting. Like if I feel like they're going down the path of it's not their event, could be a lot better, I will always talk about what's possible, and I'll usually apologize for it. Like, hey, I'm going to say a bunch of things, and and then I'll say them. They'll make decisions about that, and then I'll never say them again. Like then I literally ears back. This is what we're going to do. It's either going to be I'll give them input as someone who's done thousands of these. But if they choose to go some other path, then at that point, we never think about that again, and now we're trying to fill in all the gaps of what they, of how they want to do it. And really the timeline to keep on going back to what Jan talked about, what other people is figuring that thing out is, a key of what needs to be generated by then. Go ahead, Roscoe, and then Courtney.
Oh, I was just going to say, talk to their assistant and make them a friend as soon as possible. I deal with dean level people all the time, and they will actually have discussions. They'll go back to their office and discuss all these things in that office,
right?
That you need to hear about, and then they think they've communicated it, and they haven't.
They said it somewhere. They just didn't say it to you. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Leland.
Yeah, my problem is being a subcontractor many times, because I'm dealing then with the production company, and then the production company is dealing with the client. So you're twice removed from the actual information, and getting the information that I really need from the client by going through the production company is usually a problem. And and I've been in the business 50 years, so I know the information. If they give me a script or give me a storyboard, I can figure out what I need to do. But if they're telling me what I should bring, half the time they're wrong. They don't know how teleprompting works. They don't, I'm trying to find out how many people, how many places, all that stuff. But I don't want to pester the client. So how the question
and sometimes you don't have it. I know that we've had our poor teleprompt operators asking for lots of things, and I go, I don't know yet. Like I know how it works. I just don't have the information yet. And so that's the hard part too, is that
and frequently they don't write the script till the night before, and you don't know, are they going to drop a 60-page script on me in the morning and ready to rehearse, or are they going to drop the 30-second spot on me? I don't know.
A script the night before, that is so forward thinking. I think that, I think
it's usually the morning of. Yeah.
That's just crazy during the event, let's change all of this. Let's just rewrite these paragraphs. Go ahead, Leland.
I saw in the previous question a Gantt chart was mentioned. If nobody uses Gantt charts, it's a way to, at least from weeks out, determine who's responsible for what percentage is complete.
Don't go backwards. Don't go backwards ever.
Well, that's the process, though. That would be the answer to this question, would be to use a Gantt chart so that you can follow up with everybody and everybody knows what their responsibilities are ahead of time.
Maybe. Next question.
Keena Campbell, Princeton, Illinois. Can Alex's screen share some of these keynotes?
Well, you saw the keynote so I'm working on that. So what I'm working on is doing projects where we're going to do them all together, and you'll get to see the whole process. The problem that I have is that all the keynotes that I build are generally part of a project that I can't show. So I can't, I can't show what the plan was for the projects. And so, and usually I'm making so many keynotes that I don't have time to build one that doesn't have an output. So, but I'm working on that. I've got a little bit more room in my schedule at the moment. So we'll see if I can't get something out. Next question.
Alex 40 Goldner in London, England says, caring about crew includes maintaining mental health. How do you budget and crew events so no one works more than a certain number of hours a week? Would a maximum of 40 hours a week with no overtime allowed be a good idea?
Be a great idea. Sorry. I mean, it always looks good on paper. And we do the best we can. I mean, I do the best I can. It's just that there are times when, it is production, and it has a certain wow and flutter to it that is very hard to quantify into that. Germany's like that. I can't remember I think it's 10 hours a day is the hard deck on Germany. And I remember we were in Berlin, and I said, so what happens if they go over 10 hours a day? They go, oh, that's illegal. I was just like, what? And so we literally had a truck stuck in our dock where we couldn't bring our SAT trucks in or anything else because the driver had reached 10 hours and he had to take a 6-hour break 6 hours before the truck could move. So that's the kind of stuff that we would like to avoid. We don't want people to be working too many hours, but it is, things are unpredictable. Go ahead, Bill, and then Maggie.
Yeah, for me, I've been self-employed since I was 22 or something like that. So you just get into a different mindset. And I think creative work, since I started doing that when I was very young, is a different mindset too. It's not so much an office grind. It is this passion thing that you get into. You get involved with new people. You get excited about doing it. It's real easy to flip over and spend too much time or ask people to spend too much time because maybe their passions don't align with you. But I've never thought that in this type of work, keeping it to that kind of schedule was good for the work or good for the people. because I know that when I'm on, if I get a great idea, I've worked overnight 10 times. Nobody's told me to do that. It's because I'm on the trail of an idea and I literally cannot stop pushing that to make it better.
Yeah.
But there are other times when you're just going, I've got to take Tuesday and Wednesday off or I'm going to fall apart. And balancing that is not easy.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I think like there's kind of two parts to it. One is managing your own mental health, and then the other is managing your teams. And so in terms of mine, Bill, I'm with you. Like, I'm like, and I'm not proud of it. Like we shouldn't be working like that. It's a major issue in the event space is mental health. But I think one of the best ways that we see in interacting with this is being prepared a week in advance. So I like to go in the week before an event, basically set up that everything is done, quote unquote, in the sense that like we just need to load in, we just need to basically start executing these pieces, because then we have a little bit more leeway for these types of issues. And I mean, COVID's a perfect example. We have an event on Saturday, somebody has COVID symptoms and we're waiting for a test back. We have to plan that there's a chance she won't show up, right? So there's all these, we're learning as part of COVID, but I think being prepared long in advance is your best way to tackle 90-hour, days. Well, obviously that's not possible, but you get the idea.
And, one of the best things that ever happened to me was doing lots of union jobs in Moscone, because, it was super expensive to not be organized. And we just grew up as a production company because we got really good at not, if we went over time, we took the hit. We knew that we were going to take the hit, but it was very conscious. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to have people sitting around waiting for something. We were like, these people aren't working right now. Let's get them off the clock, and so I think that there is, I think when I started doing union jobs, everybody starts doing union jobs and they complain about the union. I mean, that's what happens. That's how all beginners begin. And then they, because they're not used to being organized. And so you learn to get organized, because it costs money every time you're not. And so, I do think that, we definitely got better. It doesn't mean that you never have a stretch, that you're going to have to, turn a hard corner. But you there are definitely opportunities to get ahead of it. When you're talking about what Maggie's talking about, of being ahead, most of it being sorted out a week ahead of time means that the days are going to be there. And it's also staffing correctly to have enough people. Go ahead, Sky.
My first part of my editing career was as a promotions editor for a news station in Los Angeles. And to be able to come back tomorrow and know that there's going to be news tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day gives you an opportunity to fail up or at least try new things. And I was there for like 5 years. So I guess I was doing something right, or I just didn't complain. But to have a single tentpole event is a lot more stress. And so I know television programs in Los Angeles that do have a 9 to 5 schedule. I know others that are completely chaos. So it's I guess the Lauren Michaels comment is from Saturday Night Live as the executive producer. He says, it's not going live because it's perfect. It's going live because it's 12 o'clock Saturday night.
Yeah. Roscoe and then Bill.
Yeah. On the West Coast, we had a spate of people leaving film sets after a 20-hour day and dying in car accidents, falling asleep, that kind of stuff. So it's not just a mental health issue about keeping the hours down. It's also a physical health issue. And obviously, if you're on a creative moment, so there's some in between there. 40 hours doesn't seem like enough when you hit a creative gem and you just want to go with it. But you have to, if you're in charge of the crew, you got to make sure they're safe. Their physical safety is taken into consideration.
Yeah. And there, to Roscoe's point, there's always there's one side of it where there's a ton of control and you're like, really, we can't just do a little bit more. The other side of it is you work in countries where there's no set of rules and you just see that there's just a lot of sloppy planning. It really becomes down to for us, the organizations that we most worry about if they bring us in is a nonprofit. Any version of a nonprofit, we brace for impact. It's just it doesn't mean we don't do them because we believe in what they're doing or we want to be involved. But the problem is nonprofits have volunteers, which means they don't recognize the value of human time. And so they, it took me a long time to figure out why are all these people so crazy? Why do they just change everything? Because they can. And so they can do that without a cost impact, and so you just have to be very careful, and that's where I worry. That's where I worry the most. But I still take them on because they're doing something that means something. But I do worry about it. Go ahead, Bill.
One of the lessons I learned too was that you can't make everything perfectly special. I mean, if you've done all the work, even if you get a brilliant creative idea and everybody has constructed this original, it's going to be a good professional event. Everything's going to work right. You're going to get 99% of the value out of that thing being just right. Tearing that apart because somebody had a great idea that could make this the most special thing in the world is not sometimes a good thing to do. You got to hold those ideas back and use that somewhere else and not disrupt because of your artistic vision.
While we're working on projects, when we reach kind of what we consider a point of no return, if the client asks for something, we'll do it. But if someone in my crew asks for something that hasn't talked to me or suggested to the client, like we're not getting to that today, but if you're on a crew and you're not the producer and you suggest something to the client, that's your last job with that producer. Like just be clear that that's, you can say whatever you want on your last job, and that will be your last one with that producer and possibly everybody they're connected to, because you are creating an instability, in the system where it's not that they wouldn't have even said yes, but they have to know that it's happening. Like the number one thing that happens to events is crew members giving clients good ideas that the producer doesn't know, that they've now gone down, and then, it's basically they run a route that nobody knew was going to happen. Anyway, that's a horrible idea. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. Andy Dolph of Durham, New Hampshire says, why do you feel thank you for watching slides are critical rather than ending the event?
Well, number one is it gives people closure. It lets them know that you meant to do that. We do a lot of fade to blacks. It's not that we always do it. The other thing is that the most committed, the people that are the most committed to the content that you did are now right there. They're the ones that stuck it out to the end. Give them somewhere to go. These are the people that are most likely going to act on anything that you say there because they stayed with you until the bitter end. And so to just let them go to me is crazy. Like, put up a thing, go to this website, check this out. Here's a QR code, whatever. This is your most passionate followers and the ones that got the most out of your event. So that's why we do it. And we try to engage clients to always do some kind of call for action. A lot of times they can't think of it, but having that conversation to Maggie's point and Liberty's point, a month out or 2 weeks out of what's the call to action and why it's important and everything else. If you ask the day before, like, oh, we got to do an end slide, they'll just say, just put up our logo. It's because they can't, think of it at that point. Next question.
Oh, sorry about that. JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia is in with, is there perhaps a way to use the meaning of the "we'll be right back" slide to your benefit rather than detriment?
Oh yeah. Fun ones. The best thing to do with text slides is to make them fun. Like we used to make ones that we never ended up using that were, we had a motion capture system. So we in the office. And so we would just do a little motion capture, little Gumby dudes running back and forth. We had one where he just ran back and forth. And he'd run the other way. And he'd run the other way. And you see this little thing fade up. It says, we'll be right back. And he's just running back and forth. And you could hear this little like banging on one side and then the other. And like he's trying to figure it out. Or we had one where he tried to put the cables together. You see his little Gumby person skeleton go, and he falls over smoking. And so our clients actually wanted it to go bad so that they could put the slides up, but then we jinxed it by having really fun slides. So yeah, so having fun slides is good. The only thing I would say is that don't put the logo. That's one thing we learned. A big event with a failure is a meme. Next question.
4 arrow slides.
Well, it's the blue screen. Like Microsoft had a blue screen, or they had some failure where Keynote popped up. Because up until only a couple of years ago, all of us just used Keynote. So a client would give us PowerPoint or slides or whatever, and we just convert it to Keynote because it runs better, and so we never tell the clients that, even the clients that had their own presentation tools. And there was one point, I think, when in a Microsoft one where Keynote popped up on the stage, and then everybody told us, like, if they have their own platform, we had to use it. So next question.
Ronnie Hostoy of Tromsø, Norway says, how do you get presentations in before any given deadline? Oh, nobody's smiling here who's ever done that.
Go ahead, Liberty, and then Maggie.
Give them a false deadline or give them a deadline in advance so that you have the buffer knowing they're going to possibly miss it.
Yeah. Maggie.
And sometimes you just have to accept your fate, unfortunately. I have interpreters who all they want is presentations for Saturday and they are not getting them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the number one is that slide decks, we're slowly getting rid of slide decks. Like that's, I mean, that it's just this slow eating away. It's kind of this, we're slowly hammering them out of our events. It's a slow process. We've been working on it for years, but most of the clients that know us will know that we're pushing away from that. And we want animations. We want to put something in, we want to cut to something. We don't want slide deck is, humiliation and, of other people's slide decks. This is usually a good way to communicate to a client that they shouldn't use one either. And then, the data of that people stop listening after 60 to 90 seconds. Once you put a slide up, it's useful too. So reminding people of that data quietly and easily helps. But to Liberty's point, there's the deadline that you need it by. Then there's the 3 days before that is the deadline that you give the client, because then you can remind them and then what we do a lot of times is we remind them like 2 days ahead of time, then the day before the deadline, then the day of the deadline, like, hey, it's due. And then the next day it's like, we really need it. And then the 2 days after is like, we really, really need to get this to do all the things we need to do. And then the third day is like, yeah, it's not going to go into the event if we don't have that.
Or
So
canceling your part of the presentation.
Well, it's just like, or it may not turn out the way you expect it to at that point. Next question.
Jim Wilkins, Marblehead, Massachusetts. If a client is forcing all communications to flow through 2 layers of non-tech people for me to talk to the other tech department, is it acceptable for me as a tech department head to try to find a back channel to that other tech?
Ooh, be careful. Be super careful of bypassing your client or bypassing a producer. It's a really fast way to not get to work with them again. Like it's, you just want to, you want to have that conversation, try to get into that conversation where you can have a straight conversation, but be very careful of working around your primary contact. Go ahead, Maggie.
My producing style is to get out of the way. So if somebody said to me oh, it's better if I can talk to them, I'd be like, great, let's all book a meeting. I'll sit there and listen. I'll know what's going on. So if you can convince the producer to be willing to have a conversation, even while they're there, if they're just watching, then that sounds like it would be your absolute best bet. The second, kind of back to what I was saying last week, is if you can make a keynote deck that is crystal clear and has more information than the producer and the client understand, that that can get to the tech folks, that might be your way. But I would really try to get that meeting.
Yeah. And as a producer, I'm always trying to get my tech people to talk to each other. So as a producer, you want to have your tech folks, interacting and figuring this stuff out. But as a tech person, you just got to be careful. Without the producer's approval, you got to be very careful about that, Mickey.
Yeah, just to support what Maggie said, ask and try. If you don't ask, then you may not get it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, one of the CEOs I worked with used to be obsessive about this whole thing, and he talked in terms of silos. His biggest challenges in turning the company around was to try to get, sales and operations and these silos that had their own senior managers, and they were all jockeying to get FaceTime with the CEO. Silos can be deadly, and trying to get cross communication between them is really powerful in every level of organization. So I love Maggie's answer to that. If I find a producer who is helping me make connections inside the organization that actually functionally make things better, they're worth their weight in gold.
Next question.
Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman, our friend, says, are there pre-production red flags? Are there things that crop up that make you think, we need to nip some things in the bud? Oh, no.
We'll figure that out later. Let's figure it out when we'll figure that on. Here's the one. We'll figure that out on site. That is that. If you say that, I'm immediately terrified of you. And I used to be that person. Oh, we'll figure it out when we get there. I am not that person anymore. I want to know where the cables are all going. I send out diagrams of where everyone's going to be seated. like I need this many 6-foot tables. I need the power dropped in these locations. I need internet at this table. These are where the chairs are. I need 36 inches from one table, from the back of one table to the front of the other one. I lay it out, not only what tables I need and where I need them, but the exact layout that I plan to use, because otherwise everyone will put me in an L. You don't want to be in an L because you lose two seats. And so I lay everything out, every little bit of what I want. When we're loading in, exactly who I'm supposed to talk to. Is this a Teamsters load in, or is it a straight load in, or is it a, how far, like the Win is a good example. It is like a mile. I don't know if it's a mile, but it feels like a mile to load into the Win. Into the Win is like a mile underground, and so you want to know that ahead of time, because if you don't come, like we knew that, we did a walkthrough and we've done a ton of stuff with the Win. So we knew that we have to bring, make sure everything's on rollers, make sure I've got enough people, make sure, because if I have to do if you don't have enough people to push it, because you can't drive to it. If you don't have enough people to push it, you're going to do 2 or 3 rounds, and those 2 or 3 rounds are going to take half your day to get back and forth. And so anyway, so you want to know what those things are, and again, like who's doing what and when the rehearsals are and everything else. If someone wants to do it, those are things that worry me most, is like wanting to figure things out on site. We want to fix things on site that aren't working. We want to learn to make it better. It's just that we don't want to try to figure it out. Go ahead, Bill.
With more experience too, you start to learn where the real problems are, because there is another thing on the other side, and this is usually for brand newbies into the industry, and that is inaction by overanalysis. I see that a lot with people who are trying to choose a camera, and you see them on 1 month and they're discussing it, and 6 months later they're still trying to figure out which camera to buy, because they're down in those spec sheets trying to think, is this one 1/2 of 1% better? And you just want to go, stop worrying about that, get a camera, learn to shoot. That is the other side of this. But at some level, when you get up in the chart, people know what's important, and that's when the detail becomes critical to master.
And I will always, at any point of indecision, I will always proffer a solution. I won't wait. I'll go, this is what we recommend. With our experience, this is what we would recommend doing X, Y, and Z, because they may not know. To Bill's point, they may not know. Give them an option. Give them an option that is the best way to do that project, in your opinion. Yeah, go ahead, Maggie.
I'm just like thinking of all the red flags, because like I said before, like pre-production is like 80% of the work. So I'm like, which one do you want? But the biggest one to me is I usually try to send the first draft of the production schedule out like 3 to 4 weeks before the event. If I'm in a meeting a few days before the event and somebody says something that's a clear indication they haven't read the production schedule, I'll start shaking in my boots and basically book a meeting with them one-on-one to like read through every line of the production schedule. Because for me, that's the most like terrifying thing we could go in with.
And one of the things to be careful of, and we're talking about a lot of these things that worry us, but when dealing with clients, that there's there is the kind of person that has you feel like everything's okay, and like whatever's going on, we know that it isn't working perfectly. It's that person that, it's the lawyer that says, oh, we'll figure this all out. It's the dentist that doesn't give you a hard time that you didn't floss 3 times a day. It's the people who just kind of softly help you get it done and not make you wrong for it all the time. It is super important in your tone of voice, how you work with your client all the way through the pre-production process. It is not telling them that everything's going to be great. It's telling them everything's nominal, we're doing well, knowing that you're working hard at it, but not because they'll be apologetic. They'll be like, oh, no, it's fine. We got, and them feeling like that is super addicting to clients. And it's just an easier way to keep everybody calm. Like you just want to keep to the facts, keep pulling those things out, but do it in a gentle way that doesn't have clients feel like they, that they don't know. They don't do this every day. They don't do all this. I mean, maybe they do. And maybe there's a lot of things that are out of their control, and you just don't want to hammer them on it. I see a lot of producers even that will hammer people on like, oh, you should have given me this by da 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 da, and they're aggressive with the client. I'm like, that doesn't make the client feel better about doing this with you or feel better about doing the project. As much as it is getting the project done, it's also having it be a great experience for everybody. I mean, you're trying to figure that out. You're not going to be perfect at it, but the crew having a good experience, the clients, the hosts, everybody, it's like, that's what keeps the work coming through. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Michael, and then Mickey.
Yeah, one huge red flag is when you get a novice producer or something, say, well, we got 3 location moves during the day, and the second one's the beach.
Yeah, exactly.
I always go, let me check my schedule.
But to your point,
those days. Yeah.
But to your point, it is really critically visualizing. That's why I use a lot of pictures, is for us to clearly visualize what's going to actually happen next, you know, and how we're going to do that, because that move can be, you know, like realizing, oh, if we just rearrange that where the last one is that, or the whatever, it'll be a lot easier. But if you didn't visualize, if you just looked at it kind of in passing, you might miss it. Michael, and then Mickey, and then we're going to move on to the next question. We're almost done.
I'd say, and for me, this is just, you know, long track record in history. What I have found is my number one job is to make the client feel comfortable, make the client relax, feel confident, feel comfortable. And almost up to that point, you're not going to get useful information out of them. I mean, you'll get some details. Yes, absolutely. But the real useful part isn't going to come out until they relax and calm down and say, okay, here's what I really am looking at, what I really need. And that's when you can start really moving forward and making the event right.
And part of that's building trust. And part of that is not overstating what can be done, or that everything's great. If you tell the client once that everything's great or everything's working perfectly, and then it doesn't do that, they don't trust you anymore. And then they don't feel safe around you. So you just have to,
Prince
you
was a perfect example of that. Prince, if he came up to you, asked you a question, you ever gave him a wrong answer, and he came back and found out, you were done.
Yeah. Mickey?
This is more regarding filming as opposed to events. But if I get a schedule and there's no time allocated for striking down in between company moves, and also if there's no travel time set in the schedule for company moves, then that's a total red flag. Because someone living in one of the countries with the worst traffic in the world. Yeah, it's no joke. It turns a 12-hour day into literally a 30-hour day. And also, if I get someone asks for a quotation and they don't want to send me the script, and they just dictate what gear I should bring, that's a total red flag for me. Like, I make the decisions on what we need, because that's why you're hiring me, because that's what I do. So give me the script, let me break it down.
Mike, real quick.
Yeah, super quick. So Jen, you could probably relate. In New York City, we would call that schmoozing. Identify the person on your crew who's a people person and a good glad hander, and let them do their thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Just out of curiosity, it seems like all of my clients that I had became friends of mine, and we would, even when we weren't doing shows. Do you find that the same with yourself?
Oh yeah. Well, because I don't keep the ones that I'm not friends with. Like I just, you know, if I don't like the client, I generally try to, not have them be a client anymore. I usually work with people that I like, and again, it's usually comes down to me of being thrown under the bus. It's usually usually I'm trying to get that client not there anymore. If that happens, go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, somebody made a good point earlier when we were talking about like working in relationship. When they're my client, especially the first time, like you are in a client like provider relationship. Like you need to make sure that that's clear and that you're honoring that. But over time, you do become more comfortable and more friendly with each other. And that's the goal of working in relationship, that you're able to say, oh, I know Alex, I know this is his preference. Let's just go with that. We're good to go, kind of thing. That's the goal eventually.
Absolutely. And I think that part of why you become friends is because you're working well together. Like you're in the trenches together. You get to know each other. Do be careful about being too friendly, though. I mean, I think the clients can get into this thing where you start getting too loose, and we have to be careful with our crew members of like, don't go out drinking with a client. like that's not, there's a whole lot of it can very quickly sour the whole thing. Next question.
Daniel Goldstein, Washington, D.C. Through notes from pre-production meetings, although notes from pre-production meetings are definitely important, what are the panelists' thoughts and opinions on using artificial intelligence for note-taking?
If the artificial intelligence had done a couple thousand events, I'm 100% behind it, but it hasn't. It's trying to make stuff up. I think that, you have to qualitatively, it's not taking the notes that's important. It's qualitatively understanding what's important. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Mickey, pretty quick. We're running out of time.
Daniel, do you want Skynet? Because you're teaching the AI how to take over. These are our jobs.
Yeah, you start letting them. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think everyone has their own ways of taking down notes, and what works logically for me in terms of how I arrange what I write down, and I like writing on paper. Might not work out for other people.
Next question.
And the last one in the queue for today is Andy Dolphin, Durham, New Hampshire. Does anybody have a reference to the stat Alex mentioned that people only pay attention for 60 to 90 seconds?
It's actually work we did late 2000s for a company that we did eye tracking. So we basically took a Tobii eye tracker, and we got a whole bunch of people to watch events, because we were trying to figure out what to build. These weren't for live events. These were just actually for presentations and video and so on and so forth. And what we found very quickly was that if someone talked straight to you for about 6.5 minutes, there was this kind of cliff where people, they didn't leave the event, they just started not paying attention. They were like working, they were obviously working on something else. Whereas and we found that was much shorter for slides. As soon as slides were up for 60 to 90 seconds, people were off doing something else. And so it was extremely confronting, changed our entire production pipeline. Everything got shifted around because they realized that no one was really listening after that. And so we had to build more animations, cut back and forth more often, build a much more inventive timeline. In the end, slide decks are lazy. They're just lazy, and so you put them up there, especially when you put all the text up there at one time. It's just a really lazy way to build stuff. So I get that people have to do that, and it's a culture. And there's some places that people will watch them a little bit longer. Researchers, academics, government, they're used to it because they're just used to being, they're used to the abuse, right? But the average person watching won't. They'll go to their phone. They'll put you in a corner in a window, and they'll move you to passive listening really fast. Stuart.
Yeah, just a little bit of cardboard trivia on this subject. If anyone's aware of the Autobahn system in Germany, there is the original designs. There was no stretch longer than 800 meters of straight road because people get bored, and they would actually put curves into the roads to keep people awake so they wouldn't be falling asleep. And it's the same sort of human nature to get bored. 60 to 90 seconds is also about as long as we can hunt a wild animal for, and that's why it happens.
Obviously there's a lot of terms for death by PowerPoint, and we call it presentation poison, because it just poisons your event, and so it's so you can, it doesn't mean you can't use the tools. So what we did when we did that, we still didn't have the money to go hire animators. That didn't work, but we built highly visual animated slides inside of Keynote that moved and did other things, and we cut back and forth to the speaker and the decks, but the decks looked almost like a motion animation, like an animation. So it was really close to doing that, and by bridging that, we were able to do much better. But just throwing up an image that's static with a bunch of text is just devastating to your event. And it's you should try to avoid it at all costs. But some clients are still attached to it, but you slowly, kind of moving them past that. Anyway, thanks to everybody. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
How do you go about moving them past that? I mean, do you have a particular way of approaching that with them?
Yeah, we let them know that it's 60 to 90 seconds. People stop listening. Like we just go, like people are going to stop listening in 60 to 90 seconds. And you have to remind them that when you're going to an event, when someone was putting a slide deck up, how many times were you looking at your computer or your phone? Like, just think about how much you spend. Just go back into your thing. And when someone does that, and if you tell them, think about what you do when someone puts up a slide in a presentation, just think about that, because everybody does it. Like, once we saw that data, we started paying attention to our own actions, and it was clear that we all go away. Like, we put up with it. So it's kind of the emperor has no clothes kind of problem, is that we're all putting up with these slide decks and we're all ignoring them when they go up. We scan them. Okay, I got it. And then we go, and it is extremely damaging to any kind of comprehension. If you're only talking, just talk and let people listen to it. If you're going to show something, show it. But you have to, you know, and I think that we're going to do the research again soon. We're talking about getting a new Toby system and doing the stuff because we think it's actually worse now. Like we think it might be half that time, you know, because of TikTok, because of YouTube, because of, you know, we're used to all this data coming at us so fast. We think people are adjusting. And so the slide decks are actually worse than they were before.
Is that why you adopted the Wacom and doing that? Or part of?
Yeah. I mean, well, part of it is just that the problem with slides, I know we're going a little over, but the problem with slides is that you build a pipeline that's not flexible. It's not agile. You know, what you want is a conversation where so if I'm talking about something, I'll have a bunch of slides. Even if you look, you know, and I want to be able to respond to the audience. If we're doing it live, I just want to respond to the audience. And so having okay, I know that there are things that you want to ask, but now I have to finish all these slides because I can't, I'm in a modal position. And that's why I have a switcher, you know, in my office, and why I can switch back and forth between whiteboard and everything else is so that I can dance with the audience, because that's going to be the most, you know, dancing with the audience is going to be the most powerful way that you interact. I mean, I think that most of us
fluid. It's
fluid. Well, I mean, all of us just sat here for 2 hours. Think about how many slide heavy presentations you've sat through for 2 hours that went as fast as these 2 hours, right? Like, I mean, that not many, because we're having a conversation, you know, and so that's we're engaged. And so, but I've been doing the same thing since, I mean, even when I went to NAB, I would just go up there and I had a slide deck and I would just start talking to the audience and we would just have a conversation until we were done. You do have, the great thing about slide decks is being able to visually show things that are hard to say in words, right? So using video to show you something, using a slide deck to illustrate something, talking over those things are all valuable. It's not like we get rid of all of that and we just sit here and talk. We might as well just do a radio show. But at the same time, you know, very creatively getting between all of those things is the thing that, you know, I feel like I'm still just getting good at. Like I'm not, you know, like we're just, but this, we're going to throw up slides is just a bunt. It's like, I give up. I don't know how to do this. It's people who are not you know, don't have that brain, you know, don't have that skill set. You know, so they use slides because they don't have a skill set to build visually. And
well, it may not have occurred to them either, though, because they've seen so many other people do that. They may have boxed that in, and now they're not even thinking about it. It's not even an idea that there could be something else.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to, you know, it's a constant education and not an education that I win all the time. So I you know, oftentimes will lose that conversation and then I go, okay, where's the slide deck? Let's get this done. You know, that's you know, you just kind of move on and do what needs to get done. All right. Now I'm going to jump to the post show. Great seeing all of you. Great questions. Thank you. Our event specialists, Liberty and Maggie, coming in and hanging out with us. It's great. Good to see you here on Thursdays. Come back on. Yeah. So it's good to have you guys here. And anyway, but thanks to the panel, thanks to the audience. And we're going to jump into the post show. See you guys tomorrow.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. What happened?
I don't know. How come we didn't get booted? Is it because Mickey's still here?
So how are you, Chris? Life treating you good?
I'm well.
Oh, good.
Well, it should have shut this thing down when he started the post show, which is early.